Post HSBC, you seem to have gotten busier. You were in private equity, you were mentoring women, you were working on sanitation, you were playing an active role in FICCI. How would you describe yourself as a crusader against environmental degradation? What factors in particular went into the making of this book?
Oh my gosh. Let it just suffice to say that I got engaged in these issues actually while at the bank 10 years ago. And the more I traveled around the world, and I was fortunate to be part of a global organization which exposed me to these spaces, actually engaged me a fair bit on what were £100 million investments in under CSR, initially in climate change and then in water, helped me shape the policies at the bank, but equally in fact, what was a real change moment at the Stockholm World Water Week was being there and hearing about India being discussed in the area of sanitation in terms of how India just hadn't got it, and that we were 60% of the world's problem, and that the SDGs would never be achieved for the world unless India embraced this. And, you know, I've never felt smaller about being Indian than being there and making these very tame defenses which were hardly being heard. And I just knew we had to do something about it. So it's things like that, you know, when you feel you're an ambassador for your country and you're out there batting against criticism, which is real, and feeling you have to do something about it.
I'll indulge the author for one more question before I go across the panel. And just before I start the panel, I think I'll do my television job here. Let's keep it brief so that we can cover a lot of ground to each of you. But Naina, I have to ask you this question. You know, your book set me thinking. When I read the introduction chapter especially, and just for the benefit of all our audience here, why are we discussing this today? And let me just quote some numbers. And she kind of really, you know, I sat up and I read it over and over again. Diarrhea accounts for 1,600 deaths a day in India, which is 8 jumbos crashing and the kind of headlines that it makes. 30% of childhood diarrhea deaths are in India. 3 children under the age of 5 die every minute. And all of this is largely on account of unsafe water, which is a big cause, and 25% of India still defecates in the open. I think Swachh Bharat is a big progress that's being made. So over the next, 40 odd minutes, we'll discuss that. But, you know, your book, in some sense, also presses that panic button, that alarm button. Is this an emergency?
It's certainly an emergency, but I totally agree with the minister that we're on the journey. The
True.
fact is
Yes.
that, you know, Swachh Bharat has become, in census after census, the government's program is voted by citizens as their most favorite program. Right. So it has resonance, and I think the Jan Andolan the minister spoke of is true. It's happening. Villages talk of ODF. They understand ODF. Something has changed in the last few years, and really in the last 2 or 3, where the embracing of this as something that needs to be done has happened at the community level, and that's what we need.
Minister, will you agree? And I think you alluded to this in your speech, and I think as somebody who's covered the whole Swachh Bharat mission from a journalist's point of view, I can tell you that this is perhaps, one of those clarion calls that people make and, the society wants to rally behind. Will you agree the fact that Swachh Bharat mission has been a success is because the whole approach changed from output to outcome? In some sense, behavioral change, and I'll take that with Piyush in just a bit. But do you believe that is the reason for the success?
Well, the short answer, Supriya, is that outcome and output, or whichever way you look at it, are both interlinked. But more important, you will never get something as transformational as Swachhta done unless you acknowledge the problem. I think what Modi ji did in August 2014, when he spoke from the ramparts of the Red Fort, was he talked about it. A lot of my friends on the liberal, left of center thing was sniggering. Is this an issue that the Prime Minister should talk about? And I can tell you, he was completely right. I mean, I had a young officer working with me in the Defense Ministry. He ended up with Param Iyer, who gets fulsome praise in Naina's book, as his number 2. And every time I came from New York, I used to say, Akshay, how's it going? We're doing a fantastic job. We've lifted so many districts, ODF. Then I used to my last conversation before I got inducted into the process was how many more to go? So he said, sir, 320 million more to go. So I said, you know, that's the population of the United States. I added a few more countries. I said, that's the number of people who go out to answer the call of nature every morning. You must be joking. We got to do better than that. And then I got inducted into the process. But let me tell you, on the SDGs, I should have said earlier, but I was holding this back for the panel. The SDGs will succeed because India will succeed. And unless India succeeds, the SDGs will not succeed. Because the rest of the world does not matter. China has already arrived, and nobody has our kind of problems. We have not only got our act together, we're going to get it done.
You know, I like the resolve, and it's not just him, and I don't think he's saying it for the benefit of this audience. I like the resolve even, you know, at the level of the Prime Minister. The fact that this Prime Minister decided that we have to make Swachhata a mission, from Satyagrahi to Swachhagrahi and all of that. A lot of this has to do with behavioral change. This cannot be done by law. This cannot be done by an initiative that's taken. And the book talks about, you know, the socio-cultural aspect of this. Is that the toughest to change, though?
It is. If you look at any kind of this thing, what the Prime Minister's mission has started is, he started a conversation to begin with, a conversation that had left us. That conversation then leads to a perception change, slightly more difficult, then to an attitude change, a little more difficult, and then it comes to a behavior change. And behavior change is very, very difficult, and for us to say that we are successful would be a bit premature. What we should say is, okay, I have learned how to score the runs. I can make it. And that's where the hope of the book is. I can only cite quickly my experience in working on polio. It took us so many years to bring about the behavior change. There were many communities who had problems. There are castes that had problems. There were perceptions that had problems. But a relentless effort is required, and I think even if it takes us 15 years, it really doesn't matter. We have to be at it all the time to bring out that behavior change. It's a behavior of centuries. Can we just keep at it?
Indeed. Mr. Mathur, I want to pick your brains. I think the Swachh Bharat mission makes a clarion call. It goes, and I think the Minister and both Ms. Kidwai are absolutely right, that we are on track to getting to our destination, and we don't have a choice. We've got to get there. But infrastructure is just one issue. I think embracing the change is another. And while, you know, there are mixed reports on how many toilets there are made and what is being used, how would you assess the success of this? Because it's not just about the number of toilets built or the infrastructure provided. It has to be who are the people using it. It should not be used for storage like it was being previously done. And I think that mindset is changing.
Supriya, both are important. If you don't have the toilets, where on earth will people go? So you need the infrastructure, you need the outputs. Outputs are necessary for outcomes. See, the key issue is how do we move from the few to the many? I mean, this is something that the book, you know, it goes through the book. In the case of the Swachh Bharat mission, we largely have the infrastructure in place. The challenge now is how is this the preferred option? You know, when I was in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Piyush had made a wonderful film about children telling their teachers, their parents, their grandparents about very simple things on energy efficiency, switching off the lights and so on. But this means you must have electricity. So the two things go together. In my view, as Piyush said, it could take a generation, but ultimately a positive mindset, an environment is created, the infrastructure is created, that's when things happen.
You know, Naina has been a banker, and so she obviously puts things in perspective from an economic and a fiscal point of view. And Mr. Godrej, this question is really for you. The UNICEF estimates that a family on an average saves about 50,000 rupees a year if it is investing in sanitation. There are various figures, various studies that talk about the economic benefits that outweigh investments by about 4.7 times. What is your own assessment in terms of the economic benefits of sanitation? I think this audience and the larger audience does care about that. I mean, why talk about sanitation?
Well, I think that you know, we have not focused on the economic benefits of sanitation because I don't think we have seen the linkages between sanitation and economic development. But if we can see that economic scene much clearer, you know, the amount, when we have to really focus on productivity. When you look at productivity, people's productivity, especially in rural areas, even more than even urban areas, I don't know if we have enough measure of that. But if we do actually start thinking about that, the amount of time that people take, you know, in rural areas, collecting water, you know, worrying about, you know, where their next meal will come from, how they're going to actually, and the health, you know, the problem of women's health, especially whilst they're cooking, and the children associated with that. I mean, if you look at all that economic cost that happens, you know, I mean, you have to put sanitation in that bracket. I don't think you can separate it out totally. Right. But I'm sure that, I think in your book you've said something like, what, 6% of GDP is affected because of these types. My gut feeling is it's a lot more than 6%.
Include pollution.
I don't know where this number has come from, but I would say it's more like 50%, you know, because you see what is the productivity in rural areas today, you know, it's really very poor. I mean, I know that in certain states, you know, productivity on the farm sector has been good, you know, but in most other states it's really very, very poor. And right. it's all interrelated. I don't think you shouldn't try to separate out sanitation alone. I think you should look at it holistically as much as you possibly can.
While we talk about sanitation, India has made good progress under the Swachh Bharat mission. I think the worst critics of this government will grant the fact that they've put sanitation right at the center stage of conversation. The reason that we're sitting here in Mumbai having a conversation about Swachh Bharat is perhaps evident to the fact. But there are very many villages that are becoming defecation free. And yet the water supply continues to be an issue. Are there taps? Is there enough water supply? Is there enough sewage system? What sort of role can Indian industry play in that? Of course, talk about the issue at hand, and then what sort of role do you envisage?
So maybe I'll speak about specific to us.
Sure.
So the way we look at this is, one, as a corporate, not a tick in the box, and what we as a cliched word called CSR. Instead, do something which is far more meaningful and impactful. We look at this more like a sustainable business development as opposed to just looking at it as, you know, social sector space. So we see it all part of an eco space. So for us, you know, we run a large refinery in Vadinar, which has its issues in terms of being drought-ridden, and also, you know, the communities around us having, you know, the sanitation issues, water issues. So that's what we picked up as a theme to work around. The circle of influence being about the around 20-30 villages close to us, affecting lives of about 10-20,000 people there. Very clear focused programs around sanitation with clear set targets as to when do we make it 100%, you know, ODF. And from the water perspective also, how we can distribute water there. One is how we responsibly use water in terms of, as one of the big users, we invested substantially into the desalters there, so they're using more the seawater than drawing into Narmada, which is again intermittent supplies. And those supplies, how we can then redirect it back to the villages and reach out to them. And further, because villages, there is a lot of agricultural related activities, how do we kind of educate them around the drip farming and those kind of methods, what kind of crops they could grow such that you can get best productivity out of whatever limited resources that we have in hand.
You know, that's one part of the argument, the corporate part of it. And just to talk to you, and I think I'm going to put you on a bit of a spot here, but as far as water is concerned, and I agree with you, you're going to talk to us more about urbanization, and I'll come to that in just a bit. But water and sanitation have to go hand in hand. Having said that, this is largely a state subject. At one level, is the central government kind of constricted, restricted, and depends on the effectiveness or the efficacy of states on this? And is that a big challenge?
Look, I'm not particularly worried on that account. because post-May 2014, all our schemes are anchored in what is commonly described as cooperative federalism. The pre-2014 schemes were conceptualized, designed and implemented from Nirman Bhavan, which means you were a control freak sitting in Nirman Bhavan, you told states what to do. Now the fact that we have 21 states which are ruled by the BJP of course helps, and the rate at which we are going will get the rest of them as well. But the issue here is you cannot wish away the problems which sanitation, the manner in which sanitation is tied to water. It is, but you have to find a solution. I am not constrained by that fact because I think state government, land is a state subject, fair enough. But that doesn't mean that the center cannot work with the state government and design an ecosystem. And the states are responding. No, in fact, all your urban schemes, whether it's a Swachhta scheme or it's Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, etc., the schemes will not succeed unless the state government is working closely with the central government, and the success is there, it's visible. I mean, if you look at the kind of investment we made in the infrastructure sector, I have a piece of paper here which has the figures. I mean, it's what, 4 times in thrice the amount in 4 years that was done in 10 years earlier. So, as I said on Swachhta, start by acknowledging the problem. There is a problem. But the good news is that we factored it in realistically and we're beginning to deal with it. And I think we are almost there.
There's a subject that I want to touch upon, particularly with this audience. The moment Swachhata was mentioned, at least in the beginning, the Swachh Bharat mission, our minds immediately went to rural India, as if it was the rural parts, the hinterland that was dirty and the rest of India was absolutely clean. Not correct at all. And I think, Ms. Kidwai, you very eloquently put in your book about urban sanitation. And because the minister is here, let's just touch upon that subject. Urban sanitation somehow doesn't get the same sort of, narration that rural does, perhaps because of open defecation and things like that. But there's enough and more that needs to be done in our cities and that are bursting at the seams.
So, the theme of what we do at the India Sanitation Coalition is BUMT, so BUMT. So build, use, maintain, treat. And the treat part of it is so neglected because even a city like Delhi, 40 to 50% of the sewage goes untreated. It goes untreated into water bodies, so think of that pollution, into open drains, or just onto the ridge, where it, therefore, is going to end up being one of the most expensive failures in history if all we do is funnel the shit into a toilet just to stick it right back where it came from, the fields. And whether it's rural or urban, we have to look at the treatment piece. And that treatment piece has to be not about looking at the Western world, so I've devoted a couple of chapters to this, of large sewage facilities, which we can, at 1/15th the cost, set up small FSTPs, so smaller treatment plants. Indonesia and Malaysia have mixed success, but they have success on these smaller plants. So imagine a resident welfare association which requires 800 rupees per head to set up a small plant. We can contribute that.
Is the magnitude of the problem being understood by not just the government or the courts or the green courts, but by people at large?
So this is one of those places where there's a dichotomy. Almost everybody, each one of us understands there's a problem. The challenge is, what do I do about it? I individually can't do very much about it. It's the getting together, it's the regulations, it's the alternatives. As the book rightly says, when people come together and figure out alternatives, things happen. So, for example, if you look at Delhi, the fact that an agency started putting out data on the air quality is when there was suddenly a call for action. This helped. So data is important, but data alone is not important because the second thing is, so what do I do about it? Sure. So understanding the kinds of options and making the business,
and acknowledging the problem.
Acknowledging the problem, as you rightly said. And then getting the business models in to make those things work. That has also been a challenge. Because when you start these off, you end up with costs which are more than what you and I otherwise pay. How do we bring them in? How do we scale them fast enough so that costs come down? That's where the challenge lies.
You know, data and business models set aside, but I'm going to ask you, I live in Delhi, I work in Delhi, and you know, it almost seems pollution is very important, I'm not breathing the right air, but you know what, it's not my problem. It's for him to resolve, or it's for the neighbor to resolve. It never really boils down to me. I mean, I'm aghast that when in the time of Diwali, there were protests of people who wanted to burn crackers, despite the quality of air we were breathing.
I think there's a...
I shouldn't be bashing Delhi in this crowd, though.
No.
It's always Mumbai.
I think other cities are no better, so you don't feel bad about it. I think there's a very distinct point that we have to remember at all points of time. We are saying a lot of things from the giver's point of view. I think we have to think of the receiver. If the receiver is communicated things in a consistent fashion, then the giver will find that it's easier to make it happen.
Mr. Godrej, whenever we talk about pollution, and I'm now primarily referring to air pollution, there seems to be much that's happening at different levels by various agencies. Do you believe a lot of the problem also roots in the fact that there is lack of coordination of effort, there's lack of coordinated effort going by various agencies? Is that where the problem also boils down? Local governments, municipalities, the agencies?
Well, I think the beginning was made, especially in Delhi, when there was a study made of the sources of pollution. Because I think you have to understand, where this is coming from and why it's happening. And I think that study has focused on where the pollution is coming from. It's also seasonal, as you know, in Delhi because of the crop burning problem. Each one of these sources has a solution. I think Naina also in the book talks about that to some extent. For instance, construction dust, okay? So you use pre-made cement blocks and, prefabricated.
That's what China does. China's ordained.
Yeah.
Why can't we?
So there are many such solutions which are actually quite simple, not difficult to implement. I think it needs a little bit of legislation. I think in all of these things, there are two aspects that are involved. One is legislation, the other is voluntary, civic society, etc., sort of following them. But I think that, for instance, if we say in our urban areas that we will not do cement mixing on the ground, that itself is a big thing. Okay. The other thing, as you pointed out also in the book, is that the roads, don't have tarmac from end to end, which means that if trucks and buses, etc., go, on the edge, you raise all the dust. Yes. So like that, for each problem that there has been identified, there is a solution.
What are the kind of initiatives that corporate India can get involved with, which moves beyond the narrative of just CSR?
So, there's clearly a business opportunity in every one of these spaces. In fact, I talk about jobs, green jobs. Jobs from the renewable sector, estimates are as much as 1 million just for solar, if India is to achieve its solar targets. Wind, if we are to achieve the wind target set, it's another 200,000 jobs. And we haven't even begun to count the number of jobs we could do if we are to actually make ourselves waste-free, because it's a business opportunity. The business opportunity of running a business where from segregation of waste to collection to production of using that plastic for energy and roads or wherever it is to go. And we have to now begin to create the environment where these business entrepreneurs are shown the way, where it may be small and medium industry that steps in there as much as big. And I just want to also add here that for corporate India, actually large corporates get it. There's a huge amount of policy out there. They raise money from global markets, so their global investors also keep them on the straight and narrow because they would not get the funding they want. Banks should play a bigger role in India. They don't, but banks can also ensure they don't lend to corporates that don't actually comply. So finance plays a very key role in where we can lend and where we don't. It's an important tool which we don't use enough. But we must also, through finance, create the business opportunity for people to come in and actually create the jobs which will give us the clean India we want.
I think the book greatly talks about the kind of jobs that the sanitation drive and
the business
opportunities that it's going to create. So I think that's worth reading.